Zack Polanski interviewed Owen Jones on his podcast. Go and subscribe to it, Bold Politics with Zack Polanski. And they spoke about the next election and the idea that it's either Labour or Reform and how we essentially ward off both Farage, Labour and Keir Starmer. Let's get straight into the video.
Keir Starmer right now will be printing off leaflets that say at the next election it's either the Labour Party or we get Nigel Farage. What do we do about that?
He's the one paving the way for Nigel Farage because we know from every single example, for example, in the European continent, that when mainstream parties take the rhetoric and the policies of the radical right, all they do is shift the terrain onto their ground, legitimize their arguments, and fuel their support. As a famous philosopher once put it, history repeats itself first as tragedy, then as farce. It's not the second time, it's the fifth, it's the eighth, it's the 10th time. By the way, you know, I've got more respect for Ed Miliband than the vast majority of people in the cabinet, but he tried that strategy also as leader of the Labour Party. He kept doing speech after speech about immigration. So did David Cameron. They fueled Nigel Farage. That's what the whole Brexit referendum became all about. And they opened this this gruesome Pandora's box, which has obviously never been shut. That's what he's doing. And actually what the Green Party, I hope, will do is force the conversation away from that, because the only way of defeating Nigel Farage is having a national political conversation that isn't about saying migrants are responsible for all our ills, is by saying we are a very wealthy country. We have the wealth, we have the talent, we have the ability. It's just the wealth that is created by the hard graft of millions of people is being hoovered into the bank accounts of a tiny few. And if we just unlocked that and invested in people and communities, then we could build a country that works for the vast majority. The Labour Party has literally just suppressed that. And, if any Labour MP tries to speak out in support of those policies, they're in danger of getting the whip taken off them and purged and all the rest. Unless we have a strong alternative, then we're just going to have a political conversation which is all on Nigel Farage's terms. So it's the cheek of a prime minister who doesn't address the grievances that make people attracted to the likes of Farage. He doesn't address people's massive, the economic grievances of a broken economic system that leads people to feel justifiably angry. He makes those worse by attacking disabled people, elderly people. And then he adopts the rhetoric and policies that legitimizes Farage so he can go, well, see, I've been proven right. And then he has the audacity to go, oh, by the way, suck it up. You've got to vote for me, even though I hate you, by the way, if you're left wing. If you believe in social justice, we, the Labour Party, we have contempt for you. You're scum. Go and die in a ditch. But you've got to vote for us because we're the only ones to stop Nigel Farage. That is an absolute absurd argument. They're the handmaidens of Farage, and the only antidote is the people in this room. You're the antidote.
Completely true. That is true. People trying to blackmail people, say, oh, you got to vote Labour. Labour's the best. Kamala Harris. No. He is ceding ground to the right, playing into the narrative of the far right and saying, yeah, immigrants, island of strangers. No. Do what, Zack Polanski's doing. Build a narrative based on hope. Immigrants are necessary. We're an island of immigrants. Tackle wealth inequality. Tackle the cost of living crisis. And this is why I think there's real energy with 90,000 members and counting with the Green Party. These are the alternative. I please, if you're part of the Your Party or any other left-wing party in the UK, please join the Green Party, because I think this is our only chance of not only potentially getting seats, but it's more about pushing the Overton window further to the left. It's so far right now. And Keir Starmer has a chance to push it to the centre. He's not doing that. He's ceding ground. And we have to challenge the narrative. That's why I get frustrated with people saying, people have got concerns. Yes, but we've got to build that narrative where the concerns are pointed at the billionaires, not the refugees. Keir Starmer hasn't learned that lesson, and I don't think he will.
That was a pretty good answer. I wish I'd said that earlier. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about the fact that it's quite obvious to me how we appeal to disillusioned Labour voters. It's a lot of what we're talking about. I think there's a unique role in British politics for the Green Party to reach out to people who might be thinking about voting reform. People who have rejected the old party politics, they want something anti-establishment, and they want something hopeful. Now, I can see very easily how we can make the argument about taxing multimillionaires and billionaires, about nationalising the water companies, about our policies on investing in the NHS and education. The one that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is migration, because it feels like that's the sticking point when you talk to people. You can find a lot of common ground on so many issues. But when it comes to migration, it's almost like sometimes it feels people stop thinking coherently. How do we reach out to people who are essentially feel like they're anti-migration, but in a way that never loses our values of being a party that recognises and celebrates the contribution migrants make to this country?
I do think part of it, by the way, is just shifting the conversation. I don't think being constantly, I often like to quote Ronald Reagan, obviously a big political idol of mine. He said something very wise. He said, when you're explaining, you're losing. And the point of that is you always want to force your opponents on the defensive. You want to force them on your terrain. You want them to be the ones who are tripping up over themselves, having to unpack their argument, which is why, the Tories kept going. They'd introduce the benefit cap, even though it drives huge numbers of people into poverty. It punishes people for private landlords. We could go on, but they were trying to force us to make difficult arguments that weren't, pithy. And, George Lakoff, great political American linguist, he says that the right often talk in stories and the left talk in facts and statistics, but we're not robots, we're human beings. Now, the right talk in stories and they lie, and we shouldn't do that, never lie, but we should try and reach people on an emotional level. There's no question about that. I remember Dennis Skinner, he's obviously a very cantankerous former miner, but, a very, in his day, this hugely charismatic kind of, voice of a former mining community. And he would talk about, his experience of when he had a heart attack, I think, and being looked after by, doctors and nurses from this country and this country and this country. And obviously that always connects with people on a human level when you humanize people who are demonized on a daily basis. But I think, we do talk about that a lot, but I think it's combining that with shifting the conversation, which is, when you're talking about tax dodgers, Nigel Farage is on the defensive. When you're talking about poverty paying bosses, Nigel Farage is on the defensive. When you're saying we should, he is trying to raid opportunistically. He'll talk about, for example, nationalising steel or whatever. So he is dangerous in that sense, and it's worth always being aware of that. But when we're saying we should tax the rich poor and forcing an agenda, then he will oppose that because he's a Thatcherite at the end of the day. He is a Thatcherite to his core who uses anti-migrant politics to deflect people's attentions from the real problem. So, of course, we do have to make the case for people, for our migrant sisters and brothers, our migrant siblings, people, in terms of humanizing the fact that without that, society would collapse. That's making the argument without having to say it that, it's not migrants who crashed the economy, it was the bankers. It's not migrants avoiding tax on an industrial scale, it's these tax dodgers. It's not migrants paying poverty-paying wages, it's these bosses. But we need to shift the argument. We need to just pick fights, because that's what Farage does. He picks fights. He causes controversy. We shouldn't be afraid to do that. We have to pick fights. And again, also personalize it, I'm afraid to say. We have to pick, examples of totemic bosses who treat their workforce like scum. And we have to humanize them in not in a good way. So I think we need to just focus on shifting the argument, because I worry too much. We keep getting stuck in these defensive postures. We're getting wrapped up in having to, and it doesn't help because it keeps the conversation on their terms. And we need to shift the conversation onto our terms.
Yeah, I think that is the main one. That is the biggest challenge, because you've got the ecosystem of media that is slanted to the right. You have to pick fights. It's not nice, but it is dirty work. Politics is very dirty work. And the left are kind of a bit too afraid to get our hands dirty. And I don't think Zack is. I think he's ready for the fight. I think he is, and hopefully will be, more cantankerous and combative, because Nigel Farage isn't afraid of this fight. He is a fighter. and he's good. He's got his suit. He's fairly not as combative as Donald Trump or other people, but he knows he's waging a war against the left. Not really the establishment, because he is part of the establishment, but we've got to pick fights and mobilize hate. We're afraid of hating. No, billionaires. Like, remember a few months ago, Elon Musk, the hate towards him. He's one of the most unpopular men on the planet now. We've got to mobilize that hate towards the right people, towards the wealthy, the powerful, the fossil fuel companies, the corporations, because even reform voters know and actually are often anti-corporate. And we've got to tap into that discontent and redirect real legitimate anger. People are angry. We've got to use that energy and anger to redirect it towards the right people. That's it, the narrative. It's all about story. It's about getting people to believe that it's the people at the top, not the people at the bottom, who are our real enemy. And you know what I'm going to say? If you want to help that project, continue that energy, which is much needed in British politics and across the world on the left. Join the Green Party. Help us get to 100,000. Hopefully we can by the weekend. And tell me your thoughts below. Are you hopeful for the future? Because that's what we need more than ever. See you next time.